have time to be on time to class, and all of the rest of you as well. So welcome to the Young Adult and New Adult panel. We're really glad you're here. There will be leftover Halloween candy later if you can stand it. I think I'd just like to start by introducing the panel. At the far end there is Cyndi Tefft. She writes spicy paranormal romance. She's the author of Between, Hell Transporter, and Even in Darkness. Next to her is Bostic. She writes young adult contemporary. Her first, Never 18, came out last year, and she has a new one, Dissected, coming out very soon. Next to her is Kristin Halbrook. She is the author of Nobody But Us, which is very good. It's like a YA Bonnie and Clyde. And I am J. Anderson Coates, Jillian. I write young adult historical fiction. This is mine, The Wicked and the Just. So, that's us. So I think when most of us think about young adult, we think about the big blockbuster books, the trend books, you know, your Allegiant and your Hunger Games, your Twilight. And it's really a challenge for us to know what to do with those kinds of trends, because they spawn these big, huge, you know, everybody's into sparkly vampires or dystopian. So it's a challenge to know how much attention to pay to those trends, whether to chase them, whether to just be head down and write what you write. So I think we're going to start by talking about how each of us approach that idea in our work and just in general. So let's start with Cyndi.
As far as chasing trends, I don't chase trends. I have one series that I've been writing for the last few years, and it is it's based on a Scottish Highlander from the 18th century who is a grim reaper of sorts, and the girl that he goes to take to heaven and falls in love with in the realm in between earth and heaven. So obviously you can see not a big blockbuster out there that has that same sort of theme. I think that the temptation is real to try and chase trends, right? Because you're like, well, that's hot, maybe I should write that. But the problem is always that we are a very fickle people, right? So what we like one day, we don't necessarily like the next day. And so if you chase trends, most likely you're going to be too late to hit that curve, especially in the traditional publishing realm, where it can take a number of years from when you get the contract signed to when the book actually comes out. A little bit more timely on the self-publishing realm, because you can write it and get it out as fast as you can write it, essentially. But I think it's more important, at least for me, to write the story that I have in my head, regardless of what is hot right now.
Yeah, I don't chase trends either. Sometimes when there's a trend out, I think about it and I maybe write a sentence or two, and then I say that's ridiculous because by the time I finish this, and if I try to get it traditionally published, this trend is going to be gone. So I just write what comes to me, and I write, you know, and I always actually go back to contemporary fiction no matter what happens, and contemporary fiction is definitely not a trend, it's kind of a niche, so I am way far off the trend scale by any sense of the word. I do like to write dystopian, and I have some of that started. And a lot of people, I think, I've had one guy say, you know, that's just a trend. That's, by the time you finish that, that's going to be gone. And I'm like, I think trends have a way of circling back around, and some of them just never, ever go away. Like, you can say, you know, there's too many vampire books out there, but to be real, they've never gone away. They've always been there. So I think that you can continue writing whatever it is you're writing if you like it, and if it's good enough, somebody will pick it up. Even if it's a vampire book, if it's innovative and different and good enough, somebody will look at it and maybe give it a chance. That's my take on it.
Well, I think the thing about paranormal romance is it's not a trend. It will never be a trend. It's actually a standard, you know, genre across the board, whether it's YA or adult.
Right.
But I think that the key is to do something that's really, really different. And so if you're writing something that is love triangle with, you know, vampires and they're rich and they all have great cars, and it definitely feels derivative, and so that's going to be tough. But anytime something is really, really fresh and imaginative and something completely new that nobody has seen before, that's going to have a shot, even if it is, you know, a vampire book or a dystopian or whatever. It's funny you mentioned that you write contemporary and so you're not hitting the trend, and actually contemporary is kind of the new trend right now.
Good for me.
So you actually hit it right at the right time. But that's kind of the thing. So I wrote NW Bookfest, which is a contemporary realistic, not having any clue about what any trends were, and it sold, and it wasn't until after that somebody goes, oh, this is starting to pick up and be a hot thing, you know, contemporary. And you have people like John Green's book, you know, that goes through the roof, which is a contemporary YA, and you have Rainbow Rolls, what's her, Eleanor Park and Fangirl, which have also, you know, shot through the roof, you know, quite unexpectedly. You know, it wasn't necessarily predicted that they would do that, but they did, and so it does look like actually contemporary is moving into some trendy territory. And there are definitely things, you know, when you're talking to editors, at least traditionally in New York, that they are looking for and are not looking for sure. And almost every editor is going to go, I don't want to see paranormal romance right now for YA. Like, I just don't. However, there are some imprints that are specialized, and they do want it. And then there are, you know, and then across the board there'll be editors who say, we're all looking for, you know, right now we're all looking for contemporary, or we see Gothic kind of trickling in as being this thing that's going to hopefully explode, and sometimes the predictions are off. So sci-fi after dystopian, you know, hard sci-fi was supposed to be the trend for YA. So quite a few books come out in the past year that are hard sci-fi, and they're kind of not really taking off the way that they were expected. There were some books that they gave big advances to, and they thought, oh, they're going to be huge. This is the new thing, and they just sort of fizzled out a little bit. So the truth is nobody knows. Like, who knows what's going to be big and what's not going to be big, and what readers are going to go crazy for, and what's going to garner a huge word of mouth and go nuts. Like, so yeah, write what you love. I mean, that really is sort of the ultimate timely advice, because you can't predict what's going to go crazy.
Yeah, I really don't have smart things to add to that. Because I write historical fiction, and it's never going to be a trend, because if it was going to be a codename Verity, would have made it a trend, and, you know. I guess if I was awesomer, I would write things that would sell. But no, I really think that there is a lot of wisdom to write what you love, because otherwise the story is not going to feel real to readers. It's really going to feel like a story, like you just cranked it out to be part of a trend, and there won't be any kind of honesty to it. And as you know, what I do with my work is sort of, it speaks to what is the story I need to tell, kind of like what Cyndi was saying, you tell the story you need to tell. So I guess with that in mind, we should kind of talk about new adult, because that is on an upswing. So let's just talk a little bit about, you know, what is it, what differs, how it differs from YA, and kind of what are some of the challenges to writing it. So I know you guys down on that end do a little bit more of it than we do, so please feel free to jump in.
Well, I think it's a good question to say, what is new adult, because it is a relatively new category or niche. And when I was originally writing between, the characters are in college, and just they're in that 18 to 25 type range that is often classified as new adult now. But when I was first writing between, the new adult didn't exist in any way, shape, or form. I was just writing what I wanted to write. And then as I researched publishing and learned more about writing and went through all the revisions phases and that kind of thing, I learned about voice, and that my voice was more suited to YA than it was adult romance. And so I revised the book to be more upper YA than it would be to be adult. And that's the direction that I went with it. But it always felt like it was kind of on the bleeding edge of a YA. It was a little bit steamier than, you know, your 15, 16-year-old maybe would be wanting to read, and it was a little bit more mature, but it wasn't really quite, I have a job and kids and, you know, the pressures of an adult world. It was sort of in this in-between space that didn't have a home. And I think that other people came across that too. College for me was a very transformative time in coming out from underneath my parents and yet trying to find out who I am and be disciplined enough to go to school and do my studying when I'd rather be partying or these kinds of things. And there wasn't really a lot in that space from a readership standpoint that I could find, but I wanted to write about it. So I didn't have any of the restrictions of publication that were bogging me down. I just wanted to write a book, so I did. And it was later that other authors and readers were wanting that same sort of thing, and New Adult was sort of born out of that, there being this emptiness between high school and job and family. So I think that my books, they sort of fall into a YA, NA category, but I wouldn't say that New Adult across the board is something that people consider the same way that I do. New Adult, in a lot of ways, people think is just young adult with sex scenes. And I don't think that that's really, personally, me, I don't think that that's really what the New Adult category should be. But it's forming, and it's forming based on what's selling and what people like. A lot of the books that are being touted as New Adult, when I go into Barnes & Noble or whatever, they were all originally self-published, did really well, got picked up by major distributors, and now they're on the shelves at Barnes & Noble right next to all of the 50 Shades of Grey knockoffs. You know, so how is it that we went from you know, college age, finding myself, to erotic romance and put those all together on the same shelf? I think it's because there's nowhere exactly that they fit, and so they're just like, this is hot, let's put them both on the shelf together. So that, I think, skews people's perceptions too of what is New Adult. Is it just whatever's steamy and sexy and is selling now? Is that always contemporary? There isn't really much in the way of paranormal New Adult. It's generally a contemporary New Adult. So I think it's an interesting discussion to have, to talk about what does each person consider New Adult versus young adult. Is it an age thing? Is it a voice thing? Do they have to be in high school? Do they have to be in boarding school in order to be in a YA sphere? Is there such a thing as an upper YA, you know, where you're 16 plus, but you're not really New Adult yet? I don't know. I think it's a great place where we are from a publishing revolution, that anybody can put anything out there from a self-publishing standpoint and let the readers decide what they want to read. You don't have to necessarily go through the hoops before of what's going to sell with a publisher, what's going to fit on a bookshelf at Barnes & Noble, etc. So it's fair game. It's open season.
Oh, I think that as far as New Adult goes, that it broadens the freedoms of what you can write as far as sex scenes and such, with young adult. I think that's why they give it a new classification. My book was labeled for 12 and up, and there have been some complaints about it because there's a very minor sex scene in it that's not really even. I mean, I would have let my kids read it, but there's parents that don't like that, and there's foul language, and I don't know. I mean, my characters are high school kids, and there's 17 years old, and there's foul language in my book. I have teenagers. I know what teenagers are like, but would I want my book classified as New Adult? No, I would not, because they're not I mean, I think that my understanding, and I could be completely off, I'm not, you know, it's so new to me that I don't even know if I really understand it, but how I picture it is college-age children, picture children because mine are teenagers, college-age students, right? College-age students where there's more freedom as what you can write for them and their experiences. But you know, they always say that kids read up in their age. So, you know, 12-year-olds are reading up to 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and that's why they classify our books as, you know, my book is for 12 and up. But it also, you know, parents need to also use their judgment as far as what their children can read. I mean, I think parents need to use that judgment. But teachers and librarians at school are using that judgment too. I mean, teachers, middle school teachers are carrying my book in their library. So, but definitely I wouldn't classify my novel or this one as new adult. But I don't know, some people may classify this one as new adult. It's a little more edgy, I think, than the last one. I don't know.
So when I was in 6th grade, I was at middle school, and someone left a Jude Devereaux, you know who she is? Like historical romance, you know. Everybody hates that term bodice ripper, but I think back then it was like one of those under the desk. And I grabbed it and took it and read it. Like, that was, and then I read all of her work. Like, I read all of her books. So, I don't know. So I think that there's a little bit of naivety to think that teenagers don't know about sex or aren't reading about sex or whatever. Like, it's there. It's everywhere. And the fact is young adult covers a very wide spectrum. There is nothing off limits in young adult. You have books about, there's a book that came out 2 years ago that was huge. That was about a brother and sister romantic relationship, you know, in such a relationship. There's books about heavy trauma and child abuse. There's, you know, everything goes as far as topically in YA. The thing that makes it very specific is definitely the tone. So oh, shoot, I forgot his name. So there's a middle grade writer who posted in the New Yorker last week this wonderful article. He did his MFA in adult fic. He wrote 2 adult literary fiction novels, and then his editor was like, let's try something different. And he asked him to write a YA, and eventually he actually aged down. Thank you, you're right. Yes, it was wonderful, wonderful. Anyways, and eventually he aged down and started writing middle grade. And what he said that the difference between YA and adult fiction is that you lose the author's narrative in YA. So in adult fiction, you get a lot of navel gazing, right? Like, you know, sometimes more or less or whatever, but the point is that with adult fiction, you get a lot more of the author in the story and their narrative in the book. Whereas YA, you gotta get the author out of there. Like, it's all about the characters and the action and them discovering the world. And I thought that was a really interesting take on it. And I think that that's really true. And, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, how many adults are reading YA now. And if you're a cynic or critical of that, you'll say, oh, well, people need simpler books because they're stupid and because the average, you know, reading level of Americans is 7th grade or whatever. But if you applaud YA and are aware of the wide variety of books that are out there, some of which are exceptionally written, then maybe you think, oh, it's because people want to read something that doesn't have the touch of the author in it. They just want to read a story that's really about characters and really about, you know, their lives and their experiences and discovery of the world. Like, there's so much beautiful discovery of the world in YA because that's what teenagers are doing at that point in their lives. They're, you know, as adults, we've seen it all and we know it and we're jaded and everything, but they're still fresh and they're interested and, you know, they're sorting out their problems in a very real and unique and dramatic way for them, you know. So then you bring new adult into it, and I just think it's just something in between. So you know, you're in college, and when you were in college, you were still figuring out the world. You were still figuring out who you were. You know, those early 20s. It wasn't until I hit my 30s that I was like, I know who I am. I don't care about what anybody else says. You know, this is a great time to be, because in my 20s, I was still figuring everything out. You know, everything from what I want to study and what I want to do with my life to what what kind of clothing I wanted to wear, like what kind of image I wanted to give off, you know, everything. So I think new adult is still working on the discovery of self. You know, that's part of it, that age group. And then there's still a lot of energy, and then there's still that absence of the author more than there is with more adult fic or literary fiction. It's interesting because we were talking about self-publishing and how the trends move faster, or you can catch up with the trends faster with self-publishing, but it also means that the markets get more saturated more quickly. So new adult right now is, even though it's new, it feels very new and very fresh, it's very saturated because everybody can write it and put it out there. And so much of it has been self-published that has been successful that it hasn't taken the time to go through the traditional publishing route. So you're getting everything really, really, really fast, and there's a lot out there. And it gets a little bit difficult to sort of wade through everything out there, which I think is a big reason that some of the best-selling self-published new adult authors end up going the traditional route, because then they can hit, like you mentioned, the distribution, and they get the marketing that you don't otherwise get as a self-published author. So it can be tough. It can be tough to break out in new adult, for sure. And definitely the stuff that's selling traditionally is, for the most part, contemporary with a heavy romantic element. But there's hope that that'll expand. You know, I'm also seeing, you know, I've talked with my agent about this because I'm actually transitioning a novel into new adult. And, you know, we've talked about that there's hope for maybe some mysteries to come out, you know, in the new adult age group, and some suspense, or possibly even some fantasy. That's a tough one because fantasy has always been young adult and new adult. Always. Because your characters are almost always 14, 15, 16, young 20s. Not always, but those characters are always, well, not always, but usually in the, like if you have a group of fantasy characters, there's usually the young people. And there's definitely a lot of exploring the world. Like that's kind of a huge part of fantasy. So, anyways, I just kept talking.
Actually, no, I think that's a really good sort of segue into an interesting idea. But Kristin and I are both only traditionally published, and Cyndi is only self-published, and Megan has one of both. So maybe we could talk about kind of why we chose what we chose, and some of the, you know, the decisions that go into that, and, you know, some of the pros and cons.
So why don't you start with that?
I can start with that. I guess the reason why I went with the traditional publisher is because I'm basically lazy and all I want to do is write. Well, because when you self-publish, you have a lot more to do. I mean, when I write a book, I write it and I give it to my editor. That's all. And then she sprinkles the pixie dust, and a cover happens, and the copy editing happens, and the line edits happen, and all I have to do is respond. I can just turn it in, I can give it to her, cover comes out, I can offer feedback, you know, it gets distributed, it goes to Kirkus, School Library Journal, Hoya, all of those. It's invisible to me. And when I wrote this one, I had a day job, so I worked 40 hours a week. I didn't have a lot of time to interview cover designers or learn Photoshop or any of the many things that you have to do. All I wanted to do was write books, so that was the right thing for me to do. And it's not off the table that I might go a different route in the future, but right now I really like the sort of simplicity of it, to write and focus all my effort and energy on that.
Yeah, definitely agree, because there's, not only is there a time output in the beginning with self-publishing, that's with traditional publishing as well, but there's also a monetary output in the beginning with self-publishing that doesn't really exist with traditional publishing. So traditional publishing, you know, you write, you do the best you can, you get an agent, the agent hopefully sells it to an editor, and the money comes to you, that's it. Like, there's never money going to anybody else. There never should be money going to anybody. No agent will ever take money from you right off the bat. Like, they get a commission if they sell your book. With self-publishing, you know, there can be a steep financial output, you know, depending on what kind of marketing you choose to do, or, you know, how if you hire a cover designer, or, you know, however you go. So that was, you know, one thing. And honestly, when I first got I got my agent 3.5 years ago. Self-publishing still wasn't a huge, it hadn't exploded like it has now. It was definitely stigmatized, for sure. It was just kind of a different, you know, different place to be, and I don't know, I wanted to go the traditional route. You know, if you self-published, it was highly unlikely you would ever see your book bound. You know, it would always be an e-file. Now there's the possibility that if you do self-publish and it sells well, that you can get a traditional contract, or you can do print on demand or different things like that. But it works for me. I like traditional publishing. My next book will be traditionally published. My third book will hopefully be, I mean, at this point, I would like all my books to be traditionally published. I don't really see myself going a different route, unless at some point I write a book and everybody goes, nope, we don't want it, and my editor goes, sorry, we're all done with you. In which case then, you know, maybe. The nice thing about going self-publishing after being traditionally published is that you've established yourself. You've established your name, you've established your brand. You know, people have gone to a bookstore and seen your name, or they own previous books, and so if they go online and see, oh, there's another one by that author, and it's only $3 because it's just self-published, then you know you've got it's the marketing that's been done for you already.
Yeah, my thing was that my first book was traditionally published, and I parted ways with my agent, and then my option book wasn't picked up by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I did query a couple agents, and then I had a good friend who got her second book deal, and this was last year, and it was probably in the middle of last year, and her release date was February of 2014, which was 2 years. And I was like, I don't want to wait 2 years from the time I actually get an agent and then the time that she actually might find me a publisher and sell my book. I don't want to wait another 2 years. By the time I find another book deal, people are going to say, Megan who? Who's that again? I don't remember her. What was her book? So I decided to go ahead and just take my publishing into my own hands. Like Kristin had said, you know, traditional publishing, self-publishing was a whole different ballgame now. I mean, just a few years ago, it was, you know, where you had to have boxes of your own books in your garage. And now you can do it basically for free if you have, you know, the talent to do some of your own things, like your covers and your own trailers and things like that, which I know how to do all that stuff. So print on demand, you know, with CreateSpace with Amazon, basically doesn't cost you much at all. So I went ahead and I did it. And I had friends who had done it before me, so I got a lot of advice and decided to see how it goes. And I'm not set on being a self-published author forever. I might still try and get books traditionally published in the future. I want to see what it's like if I am successful at it, and then go from there. It's definitely a different process. Like Jillian says, it's a lot easier to have somebody else do all the work for you, because believe me, it was not fun editing this book and getting a proof back after you think you've edited the whole thing and going, there's so many mistakes in here, oh my God. And having to go back. And I had somebody else format it. She offered to do it for me for free. Hindsight, I will never, ever, ever do that again, because I can actually format a book myself. And I had to send her corrections, and I could have done the corrections myself in a day, and it took like weeks to get it back. I wanted this book published in May, and it's now November, and so it's supposed to come out November 12th. So, I mean, back and forth with corrections, and I had like 8 sets of eyes on this thing, and still, like, up until a couple weeks ago, I was still finding mistakes in the proof copy. And there are probably still mistakes in it, and at this point, I don't care. I think there might be a couple typos, and at this point, it's like, you know what, there's typos in traditionally published books. I think I'm okay with it, because I've had it with this thing, but it's been a process. I mean, it has. It's like, but also though, with the traditional published book, if you're not one of their big authors, pretty much I'm going to be doing the same amount of publicity for myself. I'm a B-list author. They didn't really do anything except for, I mean, major thing, they send your books out to media. So I'm not getting that, but basically everything else is the same. I'm paying for my own bookmarks. I'm paying for my own, my own media materials. I'm paying for my own travel expenses. I'm getting my own book gigs like this one, and bookstore gigs and library gigs and school gigs. I did all that myself, so it's going to be the same doing that. So like I said, most of the money is going to come back to me. I'm not going to get I didn't get the advance, but the royalties are mine for the most part. I don't share with an agent or a cover artist or editors, and we'll just see how it goes and see if I like it or not.
Well, good luck.
Thanks.
So, as Jillian said, I am fully self-published. I have never had a traditionally published book, but I have self-published 3 books between Hell Transporter and Even in Darkness in the same series, and I'm working on the 4th book in that series right now. And I started back in 2009 writing it. It was published, the first one was published in 2011. So I took a significant period of time after I wrote the first draft to learn about publishing and spend time revising it. And at that time, back in 2009, 2010, as she said, self-publishing, there was great stigma associated with it that there's still some of it there, but it is waned over time. And traditionally published was the way to go. So I spent a lot of time learning about publishing and how to get an agent and editor and how to do queries and all this jazz. I read the Query Shark to learn how to do it, and I spent a year and a half to 2 years on an emotional roller coaster of, are they going to want me? They don't want me. Are they going to want me? They don't want me. This sort of, hope and despair. And after a while, I decided that I needed to get my priorities straight. And all I really cared about, all I really wanted was to finish what I had started. I didn't really care if I made any money. I didn't care if anybody read this book. I just wanted to finish what I had started. And what I had started was I wrote this book and I wanted to get to the end. I wanted to have a copy of it that I could put on my shelf, that I could be happy with, that I could be proud of. And so I said, you know what, to heck with it. Right at the very end, right before I did self-publish the first book, I did get an offer from a very small indie publisher, but when I asked them, what can you bring to the table that I can't just do myself, self-publishing, they're like, not that much, really. And so I said, well, what, I'm just going to take my chances. I'm going to go the self-publishing route. Knowing again that at that time there was a great stigma associated with it and this sort of thing. So I did it. I went through CreateSpace, and it cost me $8 for my proof. When she says it's not expensive, she's right, it's not expensive. You don't have to order anything more than just your proof if you don't want to. You don't have to order, a whole garage full of books. They can be print on demand. It doesn't cost anything at all to create an ebook through Kindle or Barnes & Noble or Kobo or iBooks or any of that. You just have to know how to do it. And so your time is really what you invest more than anything else. And I had spent so long going through revisions and editing and that kind of thing. And I'm an extreme perfectionist, so 2 typos would just drive me right over the wall.
I'm lazy.
But learning how to format your book, God knows I'd love to have those fairies come and do that, because it is time intensive, and you have to really learn mirror margins and Word and these kinds of things that just like blew my mind, right? But I had a goal. It was important to me. I wanted to get to the end of this thing. So I did. I self-published between, I put it out there, and I didn't expect anyone to read it, but they did. And I was really pleased by the feedback that I got of Between. And in fact, I even have my own little mini fan club now called Aiden's Angels, based on Aiden McRae, the character in my books. And they're all over the world. And that's something I could never have done outside of this self-publishing revolution. The traditional publishers didn't want my book. It didn't fit on the shelf. It wasn't something that was selling. People weren't clamoring for a paranormal, Grim Reaper, historical, you know, romance that was upper YA sort of NA that didn't exist. It didn't fit. And yet, readers don't really care about what fits. They want a story that engages them. They want characters that make them laugh and cry and swoon, you know? And if you can do that, who cares where it fits, right? And I think self-publishing gives you the opportunity to write the story that you want to write, regardless of what's selling, regardless of what shelves there are to be filled. So I'm really thankful that there was that opportunity for me to finish what I started. I never intended to go beyond the first book, really, but because there was the readers out there that wanted to know what happened with the rest of the story, I kept writing. I thought, oh God, I'm never going through this again. Let's close this chapter, we're done. But it was the readers that wanted to know what happens with Aidan McRae that made me go, okay, well, I guess this is worth it. And every single time I've had a book come out, I'm like, they're gonna hate it, they're gonna hate it, I just know they're gonna hate it, and they don't hate it. And that gives you that bump, you know, that excitement that I can do this. And each one, I think, successively has gotten better as I've gotten better as a writer each time. I think the third book that has come out just this year is better than the previous two, even. You know, you can talk about what's good about your work or not, but you can really see, I think, the progression of my writing through the books. And that's exciting to me because I want to be a better writer. I want to learn more about the craft and learn how to craft stories and characters and that sort of thing. So I think that self-publishing to me gave me an opportunity to tell a story that was outside of what editors were selling. And it is hard. It can be expensive, especially if you don't do the things yourself. I was very fortunate with my first cover in that I met a woman on LinkedIn through a publishing group who had just started her own company. They were doing cover design and editing, and they had worked for traditional publishers before, decided to make their own company, and she didn't have any clients. I didn't have any money, but I had lots of followers on Twitter because I'd spent, you know, several years learning publishing and that kind of thing. And so I said, you know, I'm going to promote your business if you will make my cover. I have no money. And she said, okay. And she did. She made my first cover for free. And my whole goal was just to make enough money with my second book that I could pay her actual money to make the cover of my second book. And I did. And that was a wonderful feeling to be able to have been part of her success as she was part of my success. You know, I think whether you're traditionally published or self-published, the community of writers and readers and bloggers out there, what you can do for each other is fantastic. Readers have made book trailers for me because I lack any skill in that whatsoever. You run contests or whatever, and people come out of the woodwork that have skills that you don't possess yourself. And so that was tangent. Sorry, didn't mean to take up the whole thing, but I would say I would still love to be traditionally published. I will put that out there. I would still love that. I would love to be so best-selling that Penguin comes to me and says, please, here's all our money. We want to distribute for you, right? That would be great. I would love to have fairies that would do all of that work for me. But until then, I have a space where I can write and people can read what I write, and I'm thankful for that.
Well, I think we would like to talk about what you guys want to talk about now. So let's open the floor for questions.
I was curious. I mean, I write thrillers, I write adults, but YA, from what I've seen and known over the years from other authors, is that while they're buying less books in some genres, YA and New A has been an area where they're buying more and more books. It's one of the few areas of traditional publishing where there's still money to bring on new authors. Is that what you're seeing now? I mean, of
Um,
course, everything changes every
yeah,
6
yeah.
months, right? But what are you seeing in that
It's
area?
leveling out. For the past 3 years or so, young adult was the only category of books that was showing double-digit growth. Between February of 2012 and February of 2013, hardcover YAs actually saw a decline, and paperback YA saw a 1% or a one-digit percentage decline, and there's like 8% decline. But that's over the previous years that had had phenomenal growth. So it's still a place where there's buying happening. But kind of as I was saying before, it's starting to get saturated. There've been a lot of deals made in the last 5 to 10 years. Those authors are still putting out books. There's not as much room to get in as a debut author. And there's a lot of YA out there. Like a lot of topics have been hit, a lot of things. The quality is going up as well, I think, and when it's harder to break in, that means you have to be better to break in, which is, a nice thing, it raises the bar a little bit, I guess. It still has, I think, better growth and better sales than most adult categories. Although my understanding is that market women's fiction is on a growth trend again. So we're seeing, with like Jillian Flynn and things like that, those are actually on a growth trend is my understanding. But yeah, it definitely was big, but it's starting to level off a bit. Sorry.
You're good. Go ahead.
One thing that you said about the characters, and of course, that's where it's got to come. I mean, and especially in young adult or whatever, is to have the author out of it. And this is the experience. And I've got a series of 3 mystery stories of a couple of cousins, and they progress in age. The first book, they're 13, and then they're 14, and then they're 15. Now, how do you see that working as these characters age? If the characters are popular, do you think you can continue on that line if there's basically a year gap between books in their lives?
Well, I would say that's something of a challenge for me, in that my first book starts out with them being, her a freshman in college, and each year, each book time has gone by, and so that makes it even more upper YA into new adult as she's aging. So when you start down in 13, you still have a long way to go when you're still in that age group. But if you establish a readership with the first books, they're going to continue reading through the rest of the series if they enjoy the series, regardless of how old the characters are and how old they are and that kind of thing. I write very slowly because I have a day job, but so I release about a book a year, and so my readers got older too. So I guess that's something to consider.
And if you're calling it young adult, are you calling it young adult? Because those
I haven't categorized.
because the ages of your characters are more like a middle grade age, so you need to be careful of how you're writing the book. Because if you're using more young adult themes with those age of characters, you're actually going to get the age of characters. You're going to get a younger audience reading that age of characters. Like you're going to be getting like an 8 to 12-year-old audience reading that age of characters, whereas your characters will need to be a little older to get an actual young adult audience reading that age of characters. So, but I think that following kids through school is fine. Like, J.K. Rowling did it, so.
That makes it totally
They're
okay.
not cartoons, so these kids do
Oh, right.
age. It's
Yeah.
not like
So, J.K.
Charlie
Rowling
Brown
did it.
is the
I
same.
think it's highly possible.
Sure.
Like I said, J.K. Rowling did it for 7 years?
See, and that's what I was going to say, is that in traditional publishing, there's one very famous example of that happening, which is the Harry Potter series. But that's the only example I can think of that happening. And what I'm wondering is if the original few books, which are considered middle grade, weren't so popular, how if she would have gotten away with being able to write books that then later are considered more YA. And so I think it's tough. It's tough to jump the age groups. It's tough to jump from middle grade to YA. So if you can keep your characters in the 3 years that are middle grade, say 12, 13, and even 14, if they're kind of a little bit of a younger 14, then you're solidly middle grade. If you can age them up to be 15, 16, 17, you're solidly YA. The in-between, like the sort of 13, 14, and even some 15-year-old characters, it's kind of a black hole in publishing. Like there's something, sometimes they're too mature for the middle grade reader, but they're too young for the YA reader, and it's tough to kind of to get books that have kids that are that age. And so, at least with traditional publishing, editors definitely like it if they're more solidly either middle grade or YA. But within those, a couple of years for each book, that's no big deal. That's no problem at all. And I think of books that have a younger protagonist on the younger end of YA, their subject matter is very mature. So like Elizabeth Scott's Living Dead Girl. The protagonist is young. She's 12, I think, but it's definitely YA.
She starts out young, but she's actually,
She's
actually 16 or 17.
No, I think she's 12 because she's just hitting puberty, which is why her abductor wants to get rid of her. Anyways, the whole book is about a girl who's abducted and is abused for years, and the subject matter is very dark. So it's content-wise, it's YA, even though she is a slightly younger character. So yeah, so if you can kind of move around just a little bit to fit into one or the other age groups a little bit more solidly, then I think it'll be easier for you to find an opening if you're looking at going traditional publishing.
About the online communities, I know we just gave a panel on like all the different Wattpad and Goodreads and all this stuff. I think one thing we started talking about was different places are for different age groups. Everyone wants to go on Twitter and talk about YA. Well, Twitter's just now getting young people on it. I mean, it's usually like less than 18%. And everybody's on Facebook, but now they're ditching that and going over to Twitter. Oh, they're on Pinterest. Oh, they're on Tumblr. They're not on Goodreads. So what about where are you finding your audience is living online?
Well, teenagers right now, at least my teenagers, they are on right now Twitter, Instagram,
YouTube.
And YouTube, basically. They are not on Facebook. They've abandoned Facebook because they think all the adults are there now.
Because adults and advertising
yeah.
on, so the kids
And
love it, yeah.
so like I cannot find my kids on Facebook anymore. I have to write them on Twitter or Instagram, basically.
Snapchat.
Oh, Snapchat. Oh.
They're on Tumblr, especially if
Oh,
they
Tumblr,
are a fanboy or a fangirl. Yeah, if they're shippers, if they are
The shippers.
You can find and you can find a lot of readers on Tumblr too.
Honestly, the real benefit to the social media I found is gatekeepers. Talking to librarians, talking to English teachers, history teachers. That is really where I get the most bang for my buck with social media. The readers, I anecdotally have found that most of them are sort of passive consumers. They love YouTube because they love watching things. And if you are talented enough to make like a vlog where you just you're an awesome, funny person and you can talk, then you'll probably, no, talk in an interesting way and not be boring. I can't do that. But
no, you can. You just don't know you can.
But no, that I think it would be for certain people who are very photogenic and they're very garrulous and they can talk and they can give kids something interesting to watch. I really feel that that's probably the best thing.
Because arguably John Green wouldn't be John Green without the Nerd Fighters, which is his big YouTube show with his brother Hank. His first few books, he won the Prince with them. They were acclaimed books, but they weren't necessarily huge among the teenage readership. But his starting doing the vlogging with the definitely was what really shot him into the stratosphere. if you ask me, I think his earlier books are actually better than his most recent one. But
I'm fighting words with some
I know.
people. I have to agree with you, but you know. So we had a question back there.
Yeah, I was just curious, you guys are talking about traditional and self-publishing. Have any of you thought about, or is there any authors that you know that have done Kickstarters?
So
Us.
yeah, we did. You're in the front row.
It seems to be, it seems to me sort of the coming trend that I know more and more authors who are starting to do that. I have a friend who had a series and he had a publisher that would back him if he could get a certain mark on the Kickstarter, and then the publisher would back him, and as part of it he was rewriting some of his previous books in the series, and this was for the third book, and if you purchased or supported him, you get all three with the updated, writing in his first and second novel. Like, it was just interesting concepts.
I actually did an Indiegogo campaign for this book, and I didn't ask for much. I only asked for $1,000, basically so I could get some swag to send out to libraries and bookstores, and schools, bookmarks, postcards, so I could order some buttons and bracelets, because I like to have bracelets when I visit the high schools, because I fling them at the kids so they'll ask me questions. So I could, I can't even remember now. What else did I do with that? So I could get my ISBN numbers. So I could set up distribution through Lightning Source. You can get a bigger distribution percentage through Lightning Source than you can through CreateSpace for the retailers.
Guest panelists in the front row. Would you like to?
Yeah, you want to comment?
Chime in a little bit?
Chelsea?
Because we're not experts on that.
Okay.
Well, me and Karen each did a Kickstarter this past year with goals of 2,000. Mine was mostly to pay for my cover, because I had a traditionally published book, and then I was self-publishing the sequel, and I got the same artist, who was really expensive. So,
I was just about to go, I know this author named Karen Kinsey who did
so my Kickstarter was mostly to pay for the cover and for ISBN numbers. You want to tell me what yours was for?
Oh, yeah, my goal was 2,000. It got successfully funded for 113%, which means I got extra. I paid for the cover art design, the interior formatting, swag. I paid for a copy editor because I wanted it copy edited, and then a lot of the money actually went into the printing and shipping of the paperback awards, and that was expensive, like more than I thought it would be. But yeah, a lot of the cost was the design of it, but I didn't have to pay anything up front for that book. So.
Nice.
Yeah, if I'd had to pay well, I had a deal with my cover artist where, like, if I would pay him a certain amount, and if the Kickstarter was successful, he would get the actual amount he wanted. He was really supportive of the whole thing, and he loves my books, so, but it was still really expensive either way, and I was like, oh my god, this Kickstarter better work. So I didn't put anything down for that one, which was nice, because it would have been tough. But I ended up doing, like, I did everything else myself besides, like, he did the cover.
Cover
and
art
everything
was
else.
really expensive. Though.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Mine was
a lot.
way cheaper.
Yeah.
So.
Well, if I had just been starting out and I didn't already have an established, like, this is what my covers are, I would have gone with something way cheaper. But because it was like, I really love my first cover, I really want him to do the next cover. I don't want to have to, like, and there was also an issue because the publisher still had the rights to the first one. I have the rights now, but it was kind of like, I don't know. I want a cover that's going to match, and I don't know if they're going to, like, be keeping this for a long time or if I'm going to get it back. So I did end up getting it back, and then I licensed the rights to the cover, so I have the same cover artist for both, and I will hire him for the next one too.
I only have one example of crowdfunding, and it isn't for my books, but it was because of my books, if this makes any sense. the president of Aiden's Angels, a fan club, she is a college student in Canada. And she's living off of ketchup packets and top ramen and this kind of thing. And she and I both want to go to the RT conference in New Orleans next May. But she, even working part-time while she's going to school, was going to have a really hard time putting together the funds to get down there, let alone the hotel and the registration for the conference itself. I met some people through Twitter who are starting a crowdsourcing kind of platform called Kumki. Through Twitter, you can basically, instead of fist bumps or awards or whatever, you can give a quarter, 50 cents, $1, $5 to people that you want to support on Twitter that are doing a great job, etc. You go to Kumki, you select your amount that you want to give them, and it sends them a tweet and the money, and they can claim it, kind of thing. It's a really neat platform. Huh?
How's it spelled?
It's Koomkey,
Right.
Kumki. Anyway, the people were really great. They were fans of my book that were starting this venture, and so they offered to match any of the donations that were made through Kumki towards her campaign. So we put together a campaign through Kumki for her to be able to go to the RT conference, and they were able to raise over $700 for her. And I was so blown away, people's generosity and being able to come together as a community and say, let's help this one person who loves the same books that you do. I think it's a really neat thing.
We have time for one more question. Will it be? Yes.
Historical fiction, you say it isn't doing as well, or why do you think?
I think that it has a very stable but quiet demand for it, and it's just not as shiny and flashy as things like Hunger Games, because people don't understand that history is a lot worse than things like the Hunger Games.
Wait a minute, history is worse than a dystopian
The future.
History is dystopian. Come on. History is the most dystopian thing there is, because it really happened.
When you start reading the truth.
Yeah, some of the awful, awful things. I think one of the reasons why historical fiction is such a tough sell is because a lot of it feels very similar, and you have to work hard to find things that aren't romance but are still set in the past. And a lot of people like romance, and that's great, but some people are like, I've read this story a bunch of times, I'd like something else. So I think that I would love to see a more sort of diverse, beyond Western Europe, history as well. History is set in Japan or Russia or other places, the New World even. I mean, there's stuff out there, but I think that people are kind of intimidated by it. They're worried it's going to be boring, it's going to be a history lesson, but I really feel that that's the kind of thing that can be solved by really good marketing. By, when I talk to people about my book and they're like, oh, historical fiction, I'm like, no, it's medieval teenagers behaving badly. And they're like, oh. It changes it the way you spin it. So if you're like, well, yes, this is, set in the past, and people were, no, I mean, people in the past liked fart jokes, they liked poop jokes, they liked it when people got hurt. I mean, they would have loved Jackass. I mean, they were a lot like us. We just have Cheese Whiz and iPads. So,
and she says all that, but it seems like she's coming from a more commercial perspective, because historical fiction does well with the Academy, with acclaim. For example, The Wicked and the Just is the Washington State Book Award winner for YA.
it is.
Mm-hmm.
And Codename Verity, which you brought up earlier, was a Morris Award finalist, right?
It was a
In the Prince
Honor
finalist,
book,
a
yeah.
Prince Honor book. So historical fiction can do very well with the awards, and that means that they get into the schools. That means they get into libraries, and they stay there, and they can become classics.
Well, I was going to say
let's hope so.
There's such an influence with Hollywood too. It's like what's cool in Hollywood on a historical level. Like Vikings are huge right now.
True.
I happen to know an author who's writing a YA set this Viking gal. So it's like whatever is going on sometimes visually in media, it translates into books. And I guess I was wondering if that was true for your books.
I hope so. No, I don't. I would assume so. I would assume that a lot of that is very complementary. The things that are popular in the literary world influence what goes on in Hollywood, and I would say vice versa. So it's really nice to see books being turned into film because it's good for all of us. I mean, if we had more time, we could talk about that. I'm sorry we didn't get to it, but
Oh, that's okay.
But
because my book's in film development right now.
Congratulations.
But so I would say that that's what we authors like to see. We really like to see the influence of books and film and all that.
I think that's till noon, right?
Really?
Yeah, we're here till noon.
Are we really? I thought it was 11:30.
So let's
I know
talk
when you said last question.
I love it. So tell us about being optioned. What's that?
Being optioned, yeah. So I'm going to back up just a little bit and start at the sub-rights place. So when you are traditionally published, or at least that you are usually with an agency, you don't necessarily have to be traditionally published. There's a perk in the form of sub-rights. And sub-rights is where you sell your book, your book on tape, or what is it? I don't even know, book on CD, I don't even know what it is. Audio book, thank you.
Audiobook.
I know, it's so bad. Or you sell your book to other countries. Nobody else has sold in Germany and France, and it's sold complex Chinese. So in Taiwan, which I just saw the cover for, and it looks like manga, like it's so weird and interesting. It's very cool. Anyways, and we also at my agency have a film rights agent, and so my book's been optioned for film as well. And it's an interesting process. So a lot of YA gets optioned, and a lot of YA never gets made into anything. Sometimes they get optioned for film, and the idea is that the studio just wants to hold on to those rights just in case at some future point they might want the possibility of maybe potentially making something in 10 years. And they have to renew their rights. And basically they're just saying, we claim, we're gonna pay this small amount of money to claim these, and you can't sell them to anybody else, and we're just gonna hang on to them. Because it's a drop in the bucket for a studio to pay some money just to hang on to it. And sometimes rights are sold for making pilots for TV. MTV has been in the YA field pretty strong the last couple of years, getting in, and they've made several pilots of Friends books that I know of. They haven't necessarily gone through, but it's a possibility. I'm gonna name drop here because I want to compare my experience. One of my best friends is Veronica Roth, who writes the Divergent series, and of course her book is almost out actually next March. If Divergent comes to the screen, and so she ended up going with a big studio. So there's lots of big things happening, big marketing. She's being interviewed by Ryan Seacrest, and she's all over the place, and big actors, and lots of money is going into this film, and there's a lot happening. It's very, very exciting. I got optioned to a company called Haven, and Haven is an indie company, and they show at Sundance. They won the best of show, the Audience Choice Award last year, at Sundance, and which for me is very exciting because my book's not a blockbuster movie at all. Like it's a cool indie, like great lens techniques, awesome soundtrack kind of book. So basically, so whereas Veronica's been kind of hands off, like the author has very little to do with a movie at all. Like she couldn't have said if she didn't like the actress, nobody would have done anything, nobody would have cared, right? Like it's about the director, it's about the producer, it's like that. I feel like I actually have a little bit more leeway. I've talked on the phone with the producer and the director multiple times. The director, Leanne, she's British, she lives in London. She's actually writing the screenplay as well, which I get to see on November 15th, which I'm very excited to see. I can't wait. And I've had breakfast with Rachel, the owner of Haven, the producer, and we've talked about actors that I love and that I can see, and ultimately it'll come down to who has chemistry, who fits well, and sometimes it's not who you think it should be or whatever. But it's really neat because I feel like I've kind of been carried along the process a little bit. It's possible this movie still won't ever be made, even though we have a director on board, even though we have a producer on board. It's going to the Fruitville Station producer, is looking to sign on to the project, which would be amazing. You know, it still could never happen. And that's the thing about film is until you're in your seat looking at the screen, you can't be sure anything like that is actually ever going to happen. But it's really cool when it does. And I feel like what's exciting for me is that an entirely different group of people are taking this story and putting their own vision to it. And even if it comes out looking not a whole lot like the book, I still think that'll be really exciting and really neat to see. Like I'm so fascinated by what their artistic vision is and what their spin on the book is going to be. And I don't know that that's always the case with all authors. I would imagine some of them are a little bit more, you know, they want to see what they want to see, like they want to see it very, very true to their story or whatever. But I think a lot of authors are actually pretty hands-off. It's pretty fascinating just to think about what could possibly come out of the story. Yeah.
So is it still an option, or do they actually like buy the rights?
So, well, that's like the same thing. So if they buy
well, I have a book that's optioned, and they haven't flat out bought the rights yet. They've been working on the screenplay for like a couple years, and then my understanding is once it goes into production is when they actually buy the rights. I mean, they have the rights options, so it's not like anyone else can have them, but
right.
Usually it's staged, but in the indie world, you never know. I mean, indie can operate differently than standard Hollywood contracts.
So when they buy the option, and then if they make it, they exercise the right.
Yes.
So I feel like that's the
what I'm
terminology. Oh yeah.
And it's a different payment.
Yeah. So right now, so I've been paid for the option. If the movie gets made, there's a whole nother payment that comes along with that. Right. So.
Okay.
And that happens if it gets made. So exercising
like
the right is then if it
do
gets made.
Because you have like people like actually talking to you and working on it. So like at what point do they say, okay, we're exercising it? Is that when they start filming, or?
My understanding is it's when the money comes in. So when whoever signs on as the producers, right, the money, once they've created the fund to make this movie.
Okay.
As far as I know, that's kind of when it's like, okay, here we go, like it's happening now. Good question.
Yeah, I've just had my option renewed like over and over for years, and I'm just like,
yeah,
they're gonna make it this time, so.
Yeah. I have another friend who's the same thing. So Cody Heplinger is a friend of mine. She wrote a book called The Duff.
Oh, I know her, yeah.
Yeah. She wrote a book called The Duff, which got optioned, and then the option got renewed. And then, so your options last usually 18 months or so.
I remember her talking about that, like McGee or something was signed on.
Yeah. So the director who directed like the Charlie's Angels movies and the OC TV show was actually signed on for the project. And you know, once you get, like if you get a director signed on, you're like, oh, that's a step. Like that's a big step in the right direction. And so, you know.
It's not really though, right?
You
get the money.
Yeah. It's definitely a bigger step than I just sold my option. Like.
Right.
Because because the director can have a lot of, influence in actually getting a project moving along.
Right.
For sure. But yeah, so options usually last, anywhere between 12 and 24 months, and then they have to be renewed. I think hers for 18 months. And so they just renewed it, but they didn't make it. And then they just renewed it again. They didn't make it. And it's like I said, sometimes studios just want to hold on to your idea just in case that right moment hits where that idea is perfect for the market at that moment. And so they'll just sort of keep renewing it because paying you $2,000 every 18 months is a drop in the bucket for studios, or whatever, the option amount is. Yeah, so that's what's happening. My book, it's a sort of a road trip novel. These characters start in North Dakota and they're headed for Vegas. They're running from their past, basically. And so I was talking with Rachel, the producer. She's like, yeah, we've got our locations picked out in Vegas. Like we just filmed another movie there, and we were doing some on-site photography for yours, and so we kind of picked out where we're gonna film it, and it's gonna be in Vegas, and it's like, oh, very exciting. And I also love it because it's an all-women production. So as the author, I'm a woman, the producers are women, the directors are women, who they're hoping to sign on as the executive producer is a woman, and they're very excited about that. I'm very excited about that, because women in film, man, yeah, like, the number of women directors and producers has declined since like the 1980s and 90s. You would think it would get better, but it's gotten worse. So it's exciting to have an all-female production happening. So hopefully, yeah.
Other questions?
That's all. Yeah.